Humble man ridiculed in job interview, but the next day, everyone is shocked. Lucas had spent the last of his savings on his train ticket to the city that morning, his heart beating fast with both hope and anxiety. He had prepared for this interview for weeks, rehearsing answers, reading up on the company, even borrowing a suit from a neighbor who was kind enough to press it for him. Before I continue, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next fantastic stories. This interview felt like his last chance, a way to finally step out of the financial struggle that had shadowed his life since he was a boy. As he stood outside the gleaming office building, his heart swelled with a cautious optimism, unaware of the storm that awaited him inside. When he entered the conference room, Lucas was met by 3 interviewers sitting behind a long, polished table. They were immaculately dressed, their sharp eyes studying him in silence as he took his seat. Lucas offered a polite smile, feeling the tension in the room but pushing it aside as he introduced himself and spoke of his eagerness to work. But as the interview progressed, he noticed the sneers, the raised eyebrows, and the exchanged glances that made his confidence waver. One of the interviewers, a tall man named Mr. Edwards, leaned back in his chair and scoffed as Lucas nervously shared his work experience, which mainly consisted of part-time jobs in small, local businesses. "So, you're saying you have no experience in a corporate environment?" he asked, his voice filled with thinly veiled contempt. Lucas swallowed, feeling his cheeks grow warm as he nodded. "Yes, sir, but I've worked hard all my life, and I'm willing to learn anything." His words were met with a smirk from the second interviewer, Ms. Daniels, who gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "We're looking for someone with more than hard work, Mr. Santos. We need someone polished, experienced. Our company has a reputation to uphold, and we can't afford to bring in someone unpolished." Her words stung, each syllable heavy with judgment. Lucas's heart sank as he sensed that they had written him off before he'd even had a chance to prove himself. Just when he thought the interview couldn't get worse, the third interviewer, a young, stylish man named Jake, took out his phone and pretended to scroll through it, barely hiding his laughter. "Honestly, why even bother showing up for a role you're clearly not suited for?" he muttered under his breath, not bothering to look up. The quiet snickers between the interviewers filled the room, their laughter low but cutting, echoing painfully in Lucas's ears. Lucas forced himself to finish the interview, his voice growing quieter with each response. He felt the sharp sting of humiliation with every word spoken by the 3 interviewers, who continued their subtle insults and dismissive tones. When the interview ended, Lucas forced himself to shake their hands, nodding politely even though his heart was heavy with defeat. As he walked out of the building, he felt like he had failed, not only at the interview, but at a chance to prove himself to people who might finally see his potential. Unknown to Lucas, a nearby employee in the hallway had witnessed the entire interview through the glass door and had recorded parts of it on their phone, their heart aching for the young man who had been treated so unfairly. The employee knew they had to do something, but they hadn't yet decided how to act. Later that night, the recording, filled with clips of the interviewer's cruel remarks and dismissive laughter, would find its way online. Lucas returned home that evening, the city lights blurring around him as he walked through the busy streets, trying to shake the feeling of inadequacy that clung to him. He replayed every moment of the interview in his mind, wondering if he could have done something differently. Yet beneath his disappointment, a spark of anger simmered. He knew he had been qualified for the role, that he could have done the job well. But those interviewers hadn't even given him a chance. They had judged him based on his background, his appearance, things that had nothing to do with his abilities. At home, he sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of hopelessness settle over him. His family had sacrificed so much for him, his mother working double shifts to help him through school. He had promised her he would make her proud, that he would build a life that would lift them out of hardship. Yet here he was, feeling as if the world had shut its doors in his face simply because he didn't fit a certain mold. The next morning, Lucas woke up, still feeling the sting of rejection. As he reached for his phone to check his messages, he was startled by dozens of notifications flooding his screen. Social media alerts, texts, missed calls, his screen lit up with names and numbers he barely recognized. Confused, he opened one of the messages from a friend, only to see a link to a video with the message, "Is this you? You're going viral." Bewildered, Lucas clicked the link and watched, his heart pounding as he saw a familiar scene unfold on the screen, his own interview, captured in brutal detail. Every harsh comment, every smirk and laugh from the interviewers, their words dripping with disdain. And then, he saw himself, sitting there, maintaining his composure, answering each question with dignity despite the cruel treatment. Lucas watched the video in stunned silence, feeling a strange mix of shame and anger as he relived the humiliating moments he had tried so hard to forget. The clip captured every harsh word, every cold laugh, and every dismissive glance the interviewers had thrown his way. And now, the world could see it too. The person who had recorded it had made sure to highlight the cruelty of each interviewer, even adding captions that quoted their worst comments. The video, barely a minute long, was already exploding across social media, gathering thousands of views, comments, and shares by the second. As he scrolled through the comments, Lucas felt his heart race. Strangers from all over the world were rallying to his side, condemning the interviewers for their treatment of him. Words of encouragement and support flooded the screen, with people expressing their outrage and disbelief at the blatant discrimination he had faced. Some comments reminded him that he was worthy and talented, while others recounted similar experiences, sharing their own struggles with unfair treatment. Lucas's phone rang suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. It was his mother, her voice filled with a mix of pride and worry. She had seen the video too, and though she was horrified by what he had endured, she was overwhelmed by the public support. "Lucas, people are standing with you. They see how strong you were," she said softly, her voice cracking. "I'm so proud of you, new Filio. You handled yourself with such grace, even when they were so cruel." He didn't know what to say. While he was grateful for the support, he still felt the humiliation of the interview lingering, as though the video had made his pain public, raw, and exposed. Yet as the day progressed, he noticed the video spreading even further, reaching influencers, activists, and even journalists who started sharing it, calling out the injustice of what he'd faced. He couldn't believe how many people were rallying behind him, demanding accountability from the company. By that afternoon, news outlets began covering the story, framing it as a shocking example of the discrimination many young, disadvantaged job seekers faced in the professional world. Some reports dug deeper into the company's history, uncovering other claims of unfair treatment and discrimination. Lucas's interview had unintentionally become a lightning rod, exposing a pattern of elitism and prejudice within the company. He watched, both fascinated and nervous, as reporters began calling for statements from the company's leadership, demanding answers. At the same time, he received messages from companies and hiring managers who had seen the video and were moved by his resilience. To his astonishment, he received several interview invitations from companies that wanted to give him a chance, recognizing his potential and applauding his courage. One message, in particular, caught his eye. It was from the CEO of a large tech firm who had personally reached out, commending Lucas for his dignity and resilience under pressure. "I saw how you handled that interview, Lucas," the message read. "That's the kind of strength and character we value here. If you're interested, we'd love to have you in for an interview." The offer left him speechless. He had never imagined that his moment of humiliation would turn into an opportunity like this. For the first time since the interview, he felt the stirrings of hope, a possibility that this could be the break he had been waiting for. As he considered the invitation, his mind swirled with emotions, gratitude, relief, and a touch of disbelief that his story had taken such an unexpected turn. Meanwhile, the backlash against the company that had treated him so poorly was only growing. The company's social media pages were flooded with comments condemning their behavior, calling for accountability, and threatening to boycott their products and services. People were sharing stories of similar treatment they had faced, while others called on the company to publicly apologize to Lucas. The pressure was mounting, and it seemed only a matter of time before the company would be forced to respond. Late that evening, a formal statement appeared on the company's social media accounts. In carefully worded language, they acknowledged the video and stated that they were reviewing the situation internally. However, they stopped short of an apology, framing the issue as a miscommunication rather than a deliberate act of prejudice. The response only fueled more outrage, with people accusing the company of trying to downplay their actions instead of taking responsibility. Lucas felt a surge of anger as he read their statement. It was as if they were dismissing the harm they had caused him, treating his experience as a minor misunderstanding rather than acknowledging the real damage they had done. And it wasn't just him, this was about everyone who had been made to feel small, dismissed, and undervalued simply because of where they came from. Determined to make his voice heard, he decided to post his own statement, sharing his side of the story. With his mother's encouragement, Lucas carefully drafted a message, pouring his heart into every word. He described the challenges he had faced, the sacrifices his family had made, and the determination he had brought to that interview, only to be ridiculed and dismissed. He shared the humiliation he had felt and his gratitude for the overwhelming support from strangers who had stood up for him. "I may come from humble beginnings," he wrote, "but I have the strength to stand tall, and I won't be silenced." As he hit post, he felt a weight lift off his chest, as though he had reclaimed a part of himself that the interviewers had tried to take away. As Lucas's statement spread across social media, he found himself at the center of a conversation far larger than he had anticipated. Thousands of people were engaging with his post, sharing their own stories of mistreatment in job interviews, of doors closed because of where they came from, and of opportunities lost to people with more connections or money. The response was overwhelming, and as he read through the comments, Lucas realized that his experience was one shared by many. People began to see him as a symbol of resilience and dignity, and he started receiving messages of support from individuals across the globe. As the day continued, Lucas's story was picked up by more news outlets, turning it into a national conversation. Reporters reached out to him, requesting interviews, while social media influencers and career coaches shared his story as a reminder of the need for fairness in the hiring process. Even former employees of the company that had humiliated him came forward, recounting similar stories of elitism and mistreatment. These voices painted a picture of a toxic culture that favored wealth and connections over skill and character. But perhaps the most unexpected message came from a famous CEO who had been vocal about championing diversity and inclusivity in the workplace. This CEO sent Lucas a personal email, expressing admiration for his strength and inviting him to speak at an upcoming conference on career inclusivity. "Your story has touched so many, Lucas," the message read. "People like you are the future, and I believe the world needs to hear your voice." Lucas was stunned, barely able to process the opportunity before him. A chance to speak to professionals, leaders, and other young people like himself was beyond anything he had ever dreamed of. That evening, he sat down with his mother to discuss the invitation. She listened, her eyes shining with pride, as Lucas shared his thoughts, his excitement, and his nerves. "You've been given a powerful voice, meu filho," she said softly. "This is a chance for you to speak for everyone who's been silenced. You can inspire others to keep going, to hold their heads high." Her words gave him the confidence he needed, and with her encouragement, he agreed to participate in the event. The day of the conference came quickly. Dressed in a new suit, gifted to him by a local tailor who had seen his story online and wanted to support him, Lucas walked onto the stage, his heart racing as he looked out at the crowd. The audience was filled with industry professionals, journalists, and young people just like him, all waiting to hear his story. Taking a deep breath, he began, sharing not only the humiliating experience from his interview but also the journey that had led him there. As he spoke, Lucas found strength in the vulnerability he was sharing. He told them about the sacrifices his mother had made to provide for him, the part-time jobs he had taken to help her, and the dreams that had kept him going despite every setback. He could see the empathy in the faces of those listening, and he felt a deep connection with them, realizing that his story resonated because it was not just his own, it was a shared experience of struggle and resilience. After the event, people from the audience approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him for his courage, and telling him how deeply his story had impacted them. Among them were hiring managers and CEOs who promised to rethink their recruitment practices, recognizing the bias and elitism that often crept into their hiring processes. Lucas left the event feeling a newfound sense of purpose, a belief that he could help others who, like him, had been judged unfairly. But the impact of his speech didn't stop there. Videos of his talk circulated online, reaching millions of viewers. His story inspired discussions in boardrooms and classrooms, prompting companies to reconsider the way they evaluated candidates. The video caught fire on social media, with people calling for greater empathy and inclusivity in the workforce. Lucas's voice had ignited a movement, one that showed no signs of slowing down. Meanwhile, the company where he had been ridiculed was facing intense scrutiny. Their initial statement, which had minimized the incident, had done little to quell the public outrage. Calls for a formal apology and accountability grew louder, with people threatening to boycott their products and services. Investors and stakeholders began to question the company's leadership, concerned about the potential impact on their reputation and bottom line. As pressure mounted, the company's CEO was forced to release a second, more direct statement. This time, they issued a formal apology to Lucas, acknowledging the unacceptable behavior of their employees and announcing an internal investigation. They promised to implement new policies to ensure fair treatment in their hiring practices and to hold those involved accountable. But the damage had been done, and the company's image continued to suffer. Despite the apology, Lucas received an unexpected offer from the CEO of the same company, inviting him to meet and discuss how they could address issues of discrimination and elitism within their hiring process. At first, Lucas hesitated, unsure if he wanted anything to do with the organization that had humiliated him so publicly. But after a long conversation with his mother, he decided to go. Sometimes, the best way to make change is from the inside, she reminded him gently. When he arrived at their headquarters, the atmosphere was tense, and he could feel the weight of the company's desperation to restore their public image. The CEO greeted him with a look of forced politeness, clearly aware of the power Lucas now held in shaping the company's future. As they sat down to discuss possible reforms, Lucas felt a strange sense of satisfaction, not from revenge, but from the knowledge that his voice, once dismissed, was now one they could no longer ignore. As Lucas walked through the towering glass doors of the company's headquarters, he couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and nervousness. This place, where he had once felt small and dismissed, now seemed different, less intimidating, more vulnerable. Every corner, once gleaming with authority, now felt steeped in unease as employees whispered, stealing glances at him as he made his way to the meeting room. Word of his return had clearly spread through the office, and he could sense that his presence carried a significance none of them could ignore. Waiting in the meeting room was the CEO himself, Mr. Collins, a man Lucas had only ever seen in pictures on the company's website. Mr. Collins greeted him with a handshake that was overly firm, his smile tight as though stretched across a barely controlled sense of discomfort. He gestured for Lucas to sit, and Lucas took his place across the table, sitting up straighter than he had in his initial interview, his confidence no longer hidden behind polite humility. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Lucas," Mr. Collins began, his tone polished and calculated. "We appreciate the opportunity to discuss improvements to our company's policies and culture. Clearly, recent events have highlighted areas where we can do better." Lucas nodded, remaining silent, sensing that the CEO was carefully choosing his words, aware of the scrutiny surrounding every step the company took. For the next hour, Mr. Collins outlined a series of initiatives the company planned to implement, each one designed to combat bias in their hiring practices. He spoke of sensitivity training for their staff, new hiring policies focused on inclusivity, and a commitment to diverse talent acquisition. Lucas listened patiently, but he couldn't shake the feeling that these promises, though necessary, were simply the company's attempt at damage control, a way to salvage their image. When Mr. Collins finished, he looked at Lucas expectantly, as if waiting for praise. Instead, Lucas paused, taking a deep breath before finally speaking. "I appreciate the changes you're planning to make," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But I want to know what will happen to the people who treated me the way they did. It wasn't just bias, it was cruelty. They didn't just judge me, they humiliated me. How will you hold them accountable?" The question seemed to catch Mr. Collins off guard. He cleared his throat, glancing away before answering. "We are handling that internally, Lucas," he replied, his voice dropping to a more guarded tone. "Rest assured, disciplinary measures are being taken." But Lucas sensed an evasiveness in his answer, as though the CEO was unwilling to share specific details. It was clear that the company was hoping to sweep the incident under the rug as quickly as possible. Lucas felt his frustration grow. He had come here hoping for genuine change, but he could see that this meeting was more about saving face than true accountability. The people who had humiliated him were still in their positions, still carrying on as though nothing had happened. They might receive a warning or undergo a training seminar, but in the end, they would likely continue in their roles, unscathed by the consequences of their actions. Taking a steadying breath, Lucas spoke up, his voice clear and unyielding. "I want to meet them," he said, his words cutting through the tension in the room. "The interviewers. I want them to understand the impact of what they did, to hear from me how their actions affected my life." Mr. Collins hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea, but Lucas held his gaze, unwilling to back down. He needed them to see him, not as the desperate candidate they had dismissed, but as someone who now commanded respect. After a long pause, Mr. Collins finally agreed, though reluctantly. "Very well," he said, his tone clipped. "I'll arrange for you to speak with them. But I hope you understand, Lucas, that we're committed to moving forward from this incident." His words were laced with impatience, but Lucas ignored it, knowing that this was his opportunity to finally speak his truth. As he waited for the interviewers to arrive, Lucas felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. He remembered the look on their faces, the smugness, the casual way they had dismissed him without a second thought. Now, he would face them as equals, or perhaps even with an upper hand, and he was determined to use this moment to make them understand the depth of their actions. One by one, they entered the room. First was Mr. Edwards, his tall frame and condescending smirk now replaced by a tense, guarded expression. Behind him was Ms. Daniels, who looked visibly uncomfortable, avoiding Lucas's gaze as she took her seat. Finally, Jake, the young, stylish man who had openly laughed during the interview, walked in, his face pale, eyes darting between Lucas and the floor. They each muttered a curt greeting, their confidence from the last meeting nowhere to be seen. Lucas took a steadying breath, looking at each of them in turn, his gaze unwavering. "I don't think any of you understand what that interview meant to me," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I came here hoping for a chance to prove myself, to show you that I could be an asset to your team. But instead, you made me feel small, like I didn't deserve to be in the same room as you." His words were direct, carrying the weight of his hurt and the dignity he had held onto despite their cruelty. Mr. Edwards shifted uncomfortably, while Ms. Daniels fidgeted, her eyes cast down. Jake, unable to hide his discomfort, looked away, his face flushed. "It wasn't personal, Lucas," Mr. Edwards mumbled, attempting to justify their actions. "We were just testing your resilience." But Lucas shook his head, his voice steady. Testing resilience is one thing. Mocking someone's background, their work experience, their appearance, that's not a test. That's belittling. The room was silent, the interviewers unable to look him in the eye as his words sank in. For the first time, Lucas felt that he was being seen, his voice piercing through the walls of indifference that had surrounded them during that interview. He had forced them to confront the reality of their actions, to understand that their words had consequences, that their judgments had left a lasting impact. After a moment, Ms. Daniels finally looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Lucas," she said, her tone filled with an apology that sounded genuine. "We shouldn't have treated you that way. We were wrong." Lucas nodded, feeling a small sense of closure as her words settled over him. The others, though less vocal, appeared chastened, their expressions filled with a discomfort that spoke louder than words. As Lucas stood to leave, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was not revenge, nor was it triumph. It was simply justice, a chance for his voice to be heard and his worth to be recognized. He had entered the room as a humble job applicant, and he was leaving as someone who had reclaimed his dignity, not just for himself but for everyone who had been told they were not enough. After the confrontation with the interviewers, Lucas felt a mix of emotions, relief, justice, but also a lingering sadness. He knew that apologies wouldn't erase the humiliation he'd endured, yet the acknowledgement of their wrongdoing brought him a sense of closure he hadn't expected. As he left the building, he couldn't help but look back one last time, realizing that he had faced his past head-on and reclaimed a part of himself that their ridicule had tried to strip away. Walking down the street, Lucas felt the weight of everything that had happened sink in. In a matter of days, he had gone from feeling completely defeated to becoming an unexpected figure of resilience. The messages he received from strangers, his newfound platform, the support from people who saw him as an inspiration, it all felt surreal. It was as if he'd stepped into an entirely different life, one that had opened doors and possibilities he had never dreamed of. That evening, as he sat in his small apartment, he scrolled through social media, seeing his story continue to spread. The support was overwhelming, but what struck him most were the stories shared by others. His experience had become a catalyst for people to voice their own struggles with prejudice and discrimination in the workplace. He read each comment carefully, feeling the pain in their words, knowing how it felt to be diminished for things beyond one's control. He realized that his voice had sparked something powerful, a ripple of change that he now felt responsible for nurturing. In the days that followed, the company continued to face backlash. Boycotts were organized, demanding transparency and accountability from leadership, and stakeholders grew increasingly vocal, insisting on real reform. The company's reputation, once untouchable, was now under siege, and the leadership scrambled to contain the damage. But every statement they issued only seemed to fan the flames, their carefully crafted words falling flat against the raw truth of Lucas's story, which had captured the public's empathy in a way that corporate language never could. Meanwhile, Lucas began receiving more invitations for interviews and speaking engagements. Schools, non-profit organizations, and even universities reached out, inviting him to speak about his experience, to give hope to others who had faced similar discrimination. One invitation in particular stood out, a large conference on diversity and inclusivity in the workplace. The organization wanted him to share his story as a keynote speaker, making his voice a central piece of their movement for corporate reform. Lucas accepted, though the thought of speaking in front of so many people terrified him. He spent hours preparing, reflecting on everything that had led him to this point, trying to find the right words to convey not just his pain, but his resilience and his desire for a better world. His mother watched him practice, her face filled with pride and warmth, reminding him that he was strong, that his voice mattered more than he could imagine. The day of the conference finally arrived, and Lucas stood backstage, his heart pounding as he looked out at the large crowd waiting for him. He took a deep breath, remembering his mother's words, and stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating him as he faced the audience. He started his speech quietly, recounting his background, the sacrifices his family had made, and the hopes that had driven him to pursue a life beyond his humble beginnings. As he spoke, he could feel the audience's attention, their eyes focused on him, their silence a testament to the power of his story. He described the interview in vivid detail, each insult, each smirk, each look that had made him feel small. But then, he spoke of the support that had lifted him up, the kindness of strangers, the people who had rallied behind him and made him believe in himself again. His voice grew stronger as he shared the lessons he had learned, the strength he had found, and the hope he held for a future where no one would have to endure what he did. The audience was captivated, many visibly moved, some wiping away tears as they listened to his words. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that echoed with more than just admiration. It was a call for change, a promise to fight for a fairer world. Lucas felt a rush of emotion, realizing that his story had given others the courage to stand up, to believe in the power of their own voices. After his speech, he was approached by numerous professionals, hiring managers, and even executives, all eager to discuss ways to create a more inclusive workplace. Lucas found himself at the center of conversations he had never imagined being part of, offering his insights, sharing his perspective, and pushing for policies that valued integrity, kindness, and respect over elitism and privilege. The next day, he received an unexpected call from an influential journalist who wanted to do an in-depth story on him. This wasn't just about the viral video anymore. She wanted to dive deeper into Lucas's life, his journey, and the impact he had made. At first, Lucas hesitated, unsure if he wanted to expose his life further, but after speaking with his mother, he agreed. He realized that this was an opportunity to reach even more people, to share his journey in a way that could inspire others to keep going, even in the face of hardship. The article was published a week later, featuring photos of Lucas in his modest apartment, his mother by his side, and snapshots of his life that revealed his humility and resilience. The story highlighted his journey from a young man who had been humiliated in an interview to an unexpected advocate for workplace inclusivity. It painted a picture of a person who, despite his challenges, had found the courage to stand tall and reclaim his dignity, inspiring others to do the same. The company where Lucas had been mistreated now faced even greater pressure. Their CEO, Mr. Collins, was forced to step forward once again, this time with a promise to make sweeping changes, to conduct a full audit of their hiring practices, and to establish scholarships for disadvantaged young people aspiring to enter the corporate world. Yet, for many, these gestures felt too little, too late. The damage had been done, and the public's faith in the company remained fractured. Through it all, Lucas remained grounded, continuing to work quietly toward his own goals, to support his mother, and to pursue a life defined by kindness and purpose. He had been given opportunities he had never dreamed of, but he carried them with humility, knowing that his journey had only just begun. And while he had faced moments of darkness, he had emerged stronger, his spirit unbroken, his heart filled with hope for a world that could, with enough voices and courage, finally change for the better. As Lucas's story continued to gain traction, he began to feel the weight of his new reality settling in. The support was overwhelming and the attention constant. Messages poured in daily from strangers inspired by his resilience, invitations from organizations who wanted to hear his story, and calls from companies offering him positions or internships. For someone who had once struggled to get noticed, it was both empowering and daunting. One evening, Lucas sat in his small apartment, his phone buzzing with notifications, emails, and messages. The messages he treasured most were the ones from people who shared how his experience had given them courage, students who were about to attend their first job interviews, single mothers re-entering the workforce, even retired veterans starting second careers. They all thanked him, sharing how his story had made them feel seen. These messages reminded Lucas why he was doing this. Yet the whirlwind around him was exhausting, a constant reminder of the overwhelming responsibility he now carried. Despite the offers from other companies, Lucas found himself in an unexpected dilemma. A part of him wanted to take one of these new opportunities, to move forward and leave the painful memory of his previous interview behind. But another part of him felt compelled to stay in the fight for change within the company that had humiliated him. He wanted to believe that he could make a difference, that his experience could lead to real reform from within. After all, he wasn't the only one who had been mistreated. Staying could mean making sure others wouldn't face what he had. His mother noticed his hesitation. Sitting beside him one evening, she asked, "Lucas, what is it that you truly want? Don't let others decide that for you. You have to feel at peace with whatever choice you make." Her words lingered in his mind, bringing him a strange sense of clarity. For so long, he had chased opportunity, and now that it was right in front of him, he realized he needed to choose a path with purpose. He didn't want to make a decision out of anger or pressure, he wanted to choose something that aligned with his values. After days of contemplation, Lucas decided to accept a meeting with the representatives from the original company, not because he trusted them, but because he wanted to hear their intentions firsthand. He reached out to Mr. Collins, the CEO, and requested that the meeting include members of the board as well. He knew that if real change were to happen, it needed to come from the highest levels. To his surprise, the CEO agreed to his terms without hesitation. The next week, Lucas found himself back at the company headquarters, but this time, he was meeting with a group that included not only Mr. Collins but also key decision-makers from the board of directors. He had prepared for this meeting meticulously, outlining the reforms he believed were essential: transparency in hiring practices, inclusivity training, and a mentorship program for underrepresented candidates. As he entered the room, he noticed the board members' expressions, a mix of curiosity, respect, and perhaps a hint of unease. Mr. Collins introduced Lucas to the group with a carefully polished tone, but Lucas could sense the tension beneath the formalities. "Lucas, thank you for coming," Mr. Collins began, gesturing to the empty seat at the head of the table, reserved specifically for him. "We've reviewed the changes you suggested in your email, and I believe there's value in what you're proposing. We want to make amends, to rebuild trust within the company." Lucas didn't immediately respond. He knew this was more than a meeting, it was an audition. The board was watching him, evaluating his every word and action. He took a deep breath and began outlining his proposals with a calm but assertive tone. He emphasized that these changes weren't just about fixing a public relations crisis, They were about changing a toxic culture, about creating a workplace where people were valued for their potential, not their backgrounds or appearances. Some board members listened with genuine interest, nodding as he spoke. Others, however, exchanged skeptical glances, their expressions betraying a reluctance to embrace the reforms he was suggesting. He could sense resistance from certain individuals, an unwillingness to acknowledge the depth of the problem. But Lucas held his ground, addressing each concern with patience and persistence, determined to make them understand that this wasn't negotiable, this was about integrity. As the meeting progressed, one board member, an older man with a steely gaze, leaned forward and spoke up. "Mr. Santos," he began, his voice carrying a hint of condescension, "these changes sound noble, but they're also expensive. Our company has a reputation for excellence, and I wonder if we risk undermining that reputation by shifting our focus." Lucas met his gaze, unflinching. "With respect, sir, the company's reputation has already been undermined," he replied calmly. "Real excellence isn't just about profits, it's about integrity, about standing for something beyond the bottom line." The man sat back, momentarily taken aback, while others murmured in agreement. Lucas saw a flicker of doubt cross the board member's face, as though for the first time, he was considering the possibility that their actions had real consequences. The room fell silent, each board member processing his words, weighing their options, torn between old beliefs and the undeniable truth before them. As the meeting drew to a close, Mr. Collins addressed Lucas directly, his tone surprisingly sincere. "Lucas, we've clearly misjudged both your character and your potential. I want you to consider working with us, not just as an employee, but as a consultant for these reforms. You have a vision we need, and your voice could help us become better." There was a glint of genuine respect in the CEO's eyes, a realization that Lucas had become more than the young man they had once ridiculed. Lucas was taken aback by the offer. Working as a consultant meant he would have a say in shaping the company's future, a chance to help transform the very culture that had once cast him aside. It was a decision he hadn't anticipated, but he could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that this was more than a job offer. This was an opportunity to create lasting change, to stand for everyone who had ever felt unworthy because of someone else's prejudice. As he looked around the room, Lucas felt a strange sense of pride, a recognition that he had fought for his dignity and won. This was his chance to make sure no one else had to endure what he had. But he knew he had to choose wisely, to balance his own aspirations with the responsibility he felt toward others. After a long silence, Lucas finally spoke. "I'll consider your offer, Mr. Collins," he said, his tone firm yet respectful. "But I need to be certain that the commitment to change is real, that this isn't just a quick fix for the company's image. If I'm going to work with you, it has to be because you truly believe in these changes, not because it's convenient." His words hung in the air, a challenge to the entire board, a reminder that he would not be placated by empty promises. As he left the meeting, Lucas felt a mixture of empowerment and caution. He knew the decision ahead would shape not only his own future, but perhaps the lives of countless others who would one day apply to this company, hopeful for a fair chance. In the days following his meeting with the board, Lucas felt the weight of his decision pressing on him. The offer to become a consultant was tempting. It was more than a job, it was a platform, a chance to bring about real change. But he couldn't shake a feeling of hesitation. Would the company truly support his vision, or were they only interested in repairing their image? As much as he wanted to believe in their commitment to reform, the skepticism he had seen on some of the board members' faces lingered in his mind. To clear his thoughts, Lucas spent the weekend visiting his mother. She welcomed him warmly, her face lighting up as he told her about the offer. "Meu filho, you've come so far," she said proudly, holding his hand. "You're being given a chance to help others, to make things better for people like us. But only you know if this is the right path." Her words, though simple, reminded him of why he'd started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about proving himself, it was about opening doors for those who would come after him. Monday morning arrived, and Lucas decided to meet with a few trusted mentors he had connected with since his story went viral. These were people who had experienced their own battles with corporate prejudice and had successfully fought for reform in their industries. One of them, Carla, a human resources executive who had made waves for her advocacy of inclusive hiring practices, met with him for coffee. Carla listened carefully as he explained his concerns, nodding as he spoke. "Lucas, the question isn't just whether they want change," Carla said thoughtfully, stirring her coffee. "It's whether they are willing to put in the work to make it happen. Change isn't easy, it challenges people's comfort zones, and for a company of their size, it means uprooting decades of bias. You need to make sure they are committed to seeing it through, even when it gets difficult." Her words struck a chord with him, a reminder that true reform required more than promises, it required dedication and resilience. Determined to find answers, Lucas reached out to Mr. Collins, requesting another meeting. This time, he asked to meet with him alone, wanting to test the CEO's personal commitment to the cause. Mr. Collins agreed, and they arranged to meet the next day. As Lucas entered the boardroom, he could see a different expression on Mr. Collins's face, one of cautious respect, as though he had begun to understand the depth of Lucas's intentions. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Collins," Lucas began, his tone serious but respectful. "I wanted to speak with you directly because, as much as I appreciate the offer, I need to know if this commitment to change is real. Reform isn't just a statement on paper, it's a transformation of values and practices. I need to know if the board is truly prepared for that." Mr. Collins nodded, listening intently, his face thoughtful as he considered Lucas's words. "Lucas, I won't lie to you, this won't be easy," Mr. Collins admitted, his tone more candid than Lucas had expected. "Some people here are resistant to change. They believe the way we've always done things has been successful, and they're reluctant to accept that our culture needs to evolve. But I've seen the impact of your story, and I can't deny that it's made me reconsider our practices. I want this company to be better, not just for our image, but because it's the right thing to do." Lucas watched Mr. Collins carefully, noting the sincerity in his tone. For the first time, he saw a glimpse of genuine regret in the CEO's eyes, a hint that perhaps this man, too, had been shaped by his own corporate environment. But Lucas knew that words alone wouldn't be enough, he needed a guarantee that the company's promises would translate into action. "Mr. Collins, if I take this role, I'll need authority to implement these changes and hold people accountable. I can't be a consultant in name only," Lucas insisted firmly. Mr. Collins nodded, though his expression was strained. "I understand, Lucas. We'll draft a contract outlining your authority and the resources you'll have access to. I'll make sure the board understands that your role isn't just symbolic. You'll be given real power to make decisions." His response surprised Lucas, but he remained cautious, knowing that corporate promises were often laden with fine print. When the contract arrived in his inbox a few days later, Lucas combed through it carefully. To his surprise, it outlined specific powers and resources allocated to him, including the ability to propose and lead initiatives, access to an independent budget for training programs, and direct lines of communication to the board. Still, Lucas requested a few changes to strengthen his authority, a move that would test Mr. Collins's true commitment. The revised contract returned the following day with all of Lucas's requests approved, signaling that the company was, at least on paper, ready to make room for his vision. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of hope and apprehension as he prepared to take on the role. He knew the journey ahead would be challenging, that he would likely face resistance, but this was a chance to make a difference, to reshape the environment that had once tried to silence him. On his first official day as a consultant, Lucas was introduced to the team he would be working with, a mix of department heads, human resources professionals, and even a few board members who had volunteered to support his initiatives. Their expressions ranged from welcoming smiles to guarded stares, but Lucas felt ready. He introduced himself with confidence, outlining his vision for the changes he planned to implement, emphasizing that they would require everyone's cooperation and openness. Some members of the team were supportive, nodding in agreement and expressing a willingness to collaborate. But others, notably a senior manager named Alan who had been with the company for decades, looked visibly uncomfortable. Alan's tone was polite but laced with skepticism as he questioned Lucas's plans. "You're asking us to change a lot, Lucas. Don't you think these adjustments are drastic?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Lucas met Alan's gaze calmly. "Change is often uncomfortable, Alan, but it's necessary. We can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results. I believe we can improve our workplace culture, but only if we're willing to confront the biases that hold us back. His response silenced the room, a reminder that he wasn't here to simply blend in, he was here to lead them toward a new way of thinking. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began the challenging process of implementing the changes he'd envisioned. He held workshops on inclusivity, reviewed the hiring policies alongside HR, and set up anonymous feedback channels so employees could voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. There were pockets of enthusiasm, particularly among younger employees who had felt the sting of prejudice firsthand and saw Lucas as a beacon of hope within the company. But there was also resistance, and it was most potent among a group of senior employees who had long been comfortable with the status quo. Alan, the senior manager who had questioned Lucas from the start, seemed to lead the silent resistance. His interactions with Lucas remained cordial but distant, and Lucas noticed how, during meetings, Alan often exchanged subtle glances with other senior members whenever Lucas presented a new idea. It was clear that he saw Lucas's presence as a threat, something that undermined his own authority and years of dedication to the company's traditional ways. One afternoon, Lucas gathered the team to discuss the launch of a mentorship program he had designed, aimed at supporting employees from underrepresented backgrounds. He explained that the program would match new hires with mentors from diverse departments, offering guidance and fostering a sense of belonging. "We want to ensure that every employee feels valued from the moment they join," Lucas emphasized, his voice firm and hopeful. But as he looked around the room, he saw Alan's expression darken. Once Lucas had finished outlining the program, Alan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Lucas, this sounds well-intentioned, but I'm not sure it's necessary," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "We already have orientation sessions and team-building exercises. Why should we invest in something that seems redundant?" He looked around, subtly inviting others to agree. Some of the senior staff nodded, echoing his skepticism, and Lucas felt the weight of their resistance. Holding his composure, Lucas met Alan's gaze. "Orientation and team-building exercises are important, but they don't address the unique challenges faced by employees from diverse backgrounds," he replied calmly. "This mentorship program is about more than just onboarding. It's about creating an inclusive environment where everyone feels they have a voice and a path to success." He saw a few heads nodding, but Alan remained unyielding, his gaze cold and dismissive. After the meeting, Lucas was approached by Sarah, a young HR associate who had shown enthusiasm for his initiatives from the beginning. She looked at him with concern, lowering her voice as they walked down the hall. "Lucas, I know you're doing everything you can, but Alan, he has a lot of influence here. Some of the senior staff feel like these changes are threatening the culture they've built over decades," she said, choosing her words carefully. Lucas sighed, sensing the weight of what Sarah was telling him. He'd known that change would be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated the depth of resistance he would face from people so entrenched in the company's old ways. "I appreciate you telling me, Sarah," he replied softly, feeling a surge of determination. "But I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to make this company a place where people like me would actually feel welcome." In the weeks that followed, Lucas continued to push forward, though he felt the pressure intensifying. While he had allies like Sarah and other young employees who supported his vision, the resistance from the senior staff remained steady, their disdain now expressed in passive-aggressive ways. They delayed responses to his emails, missed meetings without explanation, and questioned his every move with thinly veiled hostility. Lucas felt the weight of their silent pushback, but he refused to back down. One day, as he was preparing a presentation on the progress of his initiatives, he received a call from Mr. Collins, who asked him to come to his office immediately. Lucas's heart raced as he made his way down the hall, wondering if the CEO was about to address the resistance he had been facing. When he entered the office, Mr. Collins motioned for him to sit, his face unreadable as he studied Lucas. "Lucas, I've been hearing reports about some friction between you and the senior staff," Mr. Collins began, his tone cautious. "There are concerns that your methods are too aggressive, that the changes you're implementing are alienating certain members of the team." He paused, watching Lucas's reaction carefully. Lucas felt a surge of frustration, knowing that these concerns were simply the fears of those who resisted change. "Mr. Collins, with all due respect, real change is often uncomfortable," Lucas replied, choosing his words with care. The resistance isn't coming from the new employees or the younger staff. It's coming from those who feel threatened by a more inclusive culture. I'm here because this company needs change, and that requires challenging outdated mindsets. If that makes certain people uncomfortable, it's a sign that we're on the right track." Mr. Collins listened, his expression thoughtful yet concerned. "I understand your perspective, Lucas," he said slowly. "But I need you to find a way to bring people on board without alienating them. The company can't afford division right now. I need you to make this work, without creating further conflict." His words left Lucas feeling both supported and constrained, as though he was being asked to create change without disrupting the very foundations he was trying to rebuild. Leaving Mr. Collins's office, Lucas felt a newfound sense of determination tempered by frustration. He realized that, in order to succeed, he needed to find a way to work with those who resisted him, to make them see that change wasn't a threat but an opportunity to strengthen the company. But he also knew that his principles were non-negotiable. He wouldn't sacrifice his vision for the sake of appeasing those who clung to the past. That evening, as he sat alone, reflecting on the challenges ahead, he thought of his mother's words, her belief in him, and the people who had supported him on this journey. He knew he had to be smart, to find a way to navigate the resistance without compromising his values. And so, with a determined heart, Lucas began planning his next steps, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The following week, Lucas entered the office with renewed resolve. He knew that the resistance he faced from the senior staff was inevitable, yet he refused to let it undermine his purpose. He understood that he needed a new strategy, not to confront them head-on, but to find a way to shift their perspectives without direct confrontation. It was a delicate balancing act, one that would require patience and diplomacy, yet Lucas knew that if he could succeed, he could build a foundation for lasting change. One of Lucas's first moves was to create a series of focus groups within the company. He invited employees from different departments to share their thoughts on workplace culture, inclusivity, and what they believed could be improved. These sessions were open to everyone, including senior staff, although many of them opted out. However, younger employees attended eagerly, as did those who felt underrepresented. The focus groups quickly became a space where voices that were often silenced could be heard, and Lucas took careful notes, preparing a comprehensive report for Mr. Collins and the board. During one focus group, a young woman named Priya shared a story that struck a chord with everyone present. She had joined the company 2 years ago, full of optimism and drive, but soon realized that her opportunities for advancement were limited due to biases she encountered from some senior colleagues. "It's not just about promotions," she said, her voice trembling. "It's about respect. I want to feel like I belong here, like I'm seen for what I can do, not just for who they think I am." As Priya spoke, Lucas watched the other participants nodding in agreement, their expressions revealing stories of their own struggles. These sessions were illuminating, painting a picture of the silent struggles many employees faced. Lucas knew that if he could channel these voices into tangible actions, he would have a powerful case to present to the company's leadership. The stories he gathered were not just individual experiences, they represented the hidden challenges that lay beneath the company's polished exterior. The focus groups were, however, not without complications. Lucas noticed Alan watching him closely whenever he spoke to employees, often lingering by the door of the conference room as though he were trying to keep tabs on him. The senior manager's presence was unsettling, but Lucas maintained his composure, refusing to let Alan's scrutiny interfere with his work. He realized that Alan, and others like him, saw the focus groups as a threat, a challenge to the control they'd held over the company's culture for years. One afternoon, as Lucas wrapped up a session, Alan approached him, his face etched with thinly veiled hostility. "Lucas," he said, his tone casual but his words laced with an undercurrent of challenge, "I hear you're gathering a lot of opinions in these little meetings of yours. I hope you're being mindful not to stir up unnecessary grievances. This company runs on tradition, and too much disruption can harm more than it helps." Lucas met Alan's gaze steadily, choosing his words carefully. "I believe these discussions are essential, Alan. Change isn't about stirring up grievances, it's about understanding them so we can address them. I'm here to make this company stronger, but that requires listening to everyone's perspective, even if it challenges the way things have always been done." Alan's eyes narrowed, and Lucas sensed that his words had struck a nerve. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas's initiatives continued to gain traction. The focus groups became more popular, and employees began approaching him directly, sharing ideas and stories of both struggles and triumphs. The support was heartening, a reminder that his efforts were valued by those who needed change most. But he knew that Alan and his circle of senior staff were growing increasingly frustrated. Rumors began circulating that they were attempting to rally support among the board members, casting Lucas's reforms as disruptive and unnecessary. Despite the growing tensions, Lucas pressed forward, preparing a detailed presentation for the board. His report included data from the focus groups, anonymous testimonials, and clear evidence of the positive impact his initiatives were having on employee morale. He wanted the board to see that change was not only possible but necessary, that the company's future depended on embracing a culture of inclusivity and respect. The day of the presentation arrived, and Lucas entered the boardroom with a quiet determination. As he began to speak, he could feel the room's energy shift. Some board members leaned forward, listening with interest, while others, notably those aligned with Alan, sat back, their expressions skeptical. Lucas remained focused, presenting his data with precision, emphasizing the benefits of a workplace culture that valued diversity, integrity, and empathy. Halfway through his presentation, he noticed Mr. Collins nodding along, clearly impressed by Lucas's thoroughness. However, Alan interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. "Lucas, while this all sounds very idealistic, I question whether this approach is truly sustainable. We're here to drive results, not host therapy sessions. The strength of this company lies in its legacy, not in pandering to every complaint." Lucas paused, taking a moment to collect his thoughts before responding. "With respect, Alan, I believe that legacy is strengthened by adapting to the times. The business landscape is changing, and so are the expectations of employees and clients alike. Inclusivity and respect are no longer optional, they are essential. Our legacy should reflect a commitment to excellence, yes, but also to ethics and humanity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Lucas felt a surge of confidence as he continued. He could see that some board members were warming to his ideas, their expressions thoughtful, while Alan's influence seemed to wane. Yet he knew that the battle was far from over. The resistance he faced wasn't just about him, it was about the values he represented, values that threatened the old guard's way of doing things. As the meeting ended, Mr. Collins approached Lucas, his face filled with admiration. "You did well, Lucas," he said, his tone sincere. "I believe you're right about what needs to happen here. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. You have my support." Lucas thanked him, feeling a sense of victory tempered by caution. He knew that Alan and others like him wouldn't back down easily. This was only the beginning of a larger fight. Leaving the boardroom, Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that his efforts were making a difference, however gradual. He had allies now, people who believed in his vision and were willing to stand with him. Yet he remained vigilant, aware that true change required persistence, resilience, and the courage to face resistance at every turn. The weeks following Lucas's board presentation were filled with both progress and tension. Lucas's initiatives gained traction, and he continued to build trust among employees who had once felt overlooked. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet hostility simmered. Alan and his circle grew increasingly vocal in their opposition, quietly undermining Lucas's efforts with subtle but powerful resistance. Lucas began to feel their influence reaching into every corner of the company, a reminder that real change was never achieved without pushback. One afternoon, Lucas received an anonymous email warning him to watch his back. It was vague, containing only a few lines about how certain powerful people within the company were unhappy with the direction he was taking. He stared at the message, his mind racing. Part of him wondered if it was a prank, but another part felt a chill, a nagging feeling that his work was making enemies he hadn't anticipated. Determined to uncover the source of the resistance, Lucas met with Sarah, the HR associate who had been one of his earliest supporters. She listened to his concerns, nodding thoughtfully as he explained the anonymous email. "I'm not surprised," she said, her voice laced with worry. "I've overheard Alan and some of the other managers talking. They think you're here to disrupt the company, not improve it. They see you as a threat to everything they've worked for. Lucas sighed, feeling the weight of her words. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't realized how deeply rooted it would be. If they really believe that, then they're missing the point entirely, he replied. This isn't about erasing the past, it's about creating a future where everyone has an equal chance to succeed. Sarah nodded, but Lucas could see the concern in her eyes. He knew she was right. Alan and his allies weren't just opposing his ideas, they were actively working to dismantle his progress. The following week, things took a darker turn. One of Lucas's scheduled workshops on inclusivity was mysteriously cancelled without his knowledge, and employees who had signed up reported that they were told it was no longer necessary. Lucas was furious, but when he confronted Alan about it, the senior manager feigned innocence. "Oh, there must have been some miscommunication," Alan said, his expression carefully blank. "I'll look into it." But Lucas knew better. This was Alan's way of showing him who still held power. Lucas returned to his office, feeling a surge of frustration and anger. The sabotage was blatant, and he knew he couldn't fight it alone. That evening, he sent an email to Mr. Collins, explaining the situation and requesting a private meeting. He needed to address the resistance head-on, to make it clear that his work was being actively undermined. If Mr. Collins was truly committed to change, he would have to confront Alan and the others who stood in the way. When Lucas met with Mr. Collins the next day, he laid everything out, detailing each instance of sabotage, each act of passive resistance that had stifled his progress. Mr. Collins listened carefully, his face growing more serious as Lucas spoke. "I knew there would be resistance, Lucas, but I didn't realize it had gone this far," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "Alan and his group have been with this company for decades. Their influence is significant, but that doesn't excuse this behavior." Lucas could sense that Mr. Collins was conflicted, caught between his loyalty to his senior team and his support for Lucas's mission. "I need your full support on this," Lucas said firmly. "If we're serious about changing this company's culture, we can't allow this kind of sabotage to continue. It's not just undermining me, it's undermining everything we're trying to accomplish." Mr. Collins nodded, his gaze thoughtful, and Lucas felt a glimmer of hope. But later that week, Lucas began to notice a shift in the atmosphere. Alan and his allies became subtler in their actions, yet the resistance remained. Emails went unanswered, employees who supported his initiatives were quietly reassigned, and rumors spread that Lucas's position was temporary, that he was merely a trial consultant. The pressure weighed on him, each day feeling like a test of endurance, a constant struggle to push forward while forces worked silently to pull him back. In response, Lucas decided to host an informal gathering for employees interested in his initiatives, hoping to reignite their passion for change. He sent out invitations discreetly, asking those who believed in his vision to join him for a discussion on how they could move forward together. To his relief, a large group showed up, filling the small conference room with a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. They shared stories, frustrations, and hopes, each person reminding Lucas that his efforts were impacting lives. One attendee, a young analyst named Thomas, stood up and spoke passionately about how Lucas's initiatives had made him feel seen for the first time. "I used to think I'd never fit in here," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "But you've given me a reason to believe that I belong, that my voice matters." His words resonated deeply, bringing a sense of unity to the room. Lucas looked around, feeling renewed strength in the faces of his supporters, a reminder that despite the obstacles, his work was making a difference. As the gathering ended, several employees approached Lucas, offering their help and expressing their gratitude. Sarah stayed behind, her expression serious. "Lucas, I'm with you, but you have to be careful," she warned. "Alan and his group won't stop until they've pushed you out. They're afraid of losing control, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their power." Lucas nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He knew the fight ahead would require every ounce of his resolve. That night, Lucas returned home, feeling a renewed sense of purpose tempered by the harsh reality of what he was up against. He thought of his mother's words, the strength she had taught him, and the resilience that had carried him through every hardship. He realized that his fight wasn't just for himself, it was for everyone who had ever felt dismissed, undervalued, and silenced. And so, with quiet determination, Lucas prepared himself for the battles to come, knowing that he was standing on the front lines of a much larger struggle. As the days went on, Lucas felt the resistance around him growing even stronger, like an invisible force constantly pulling against him. Despite the moments of encouragement and the support he'd built, the pressures from Alan's group and their quiet campaign of sabotage weighed heavily. It was clear they intended to isolate him, to make him question his worth and weaken his resolve. Lucas, however, refused to back down. He doubled down on his initiatives, holding additional focus groups and reinforcing his presence among employees who needed his leadership most. One morning, Lucas arrived to find an email from the head of finance stating that funds for his inclusivity workshops had been temporarily suspended due to budgetary constraints. He read the email in disbelief, knowing this was yet another tactic to undermine his progress. He suspected Alan's hand in this, his fingerprints visible in every strategic miscommunication or resource restriction Lucas encountered. Frustrated but undeterred, Lucas reached out to Mr. Collins, requesting a meeting to clarify the situation. This had gone too far. In the meeting with Mr. Collins, Lucas explained his suspicions, detailing how each roadblock he faced seemed to be part of a larger, calculated strategy to diminish his role. Mr. Collins listened, his expression tense. "I had no idea it had escalated to this level, Lucas," he admitted, a hint of guilt in his voice. "I'll speak to the finance team. Your work is important, and I won't allow internal politics to derail it." His words were reassuring, but Lucas sensed hesitation in his tone, as if Mr. Collins was balancing his support for Lucas against the loyalty he felt for his longtime senior staff. True to his word, Mr. Collins managed to release the funds Lucas needed, and the workshops resumed. Yet, Lucas could feel the growing hostility in every corner of the office. Alan's influence was powerful, his methods subtle yet unmistakable. Colleagues who had once greeted Lucas warmly now avoided eye contact, and whispers filled the hallways as he passed by. He knew Alan had rallied his supporters, spreading rumors that painted Lucas as an outsider, someone trying to dismantle the company's traditions. In a moment of frustration, Lucas reached out to Carla, one of his mentors, and explained the situation. Carla listened patiently, her voice calm and steady as she advised him. "Lucas, this is the reality of institutional change. The people who oppose you aren't just protecting their power, they're protecting their identities, their belief systems. Change scares them because it threatens what they've built their careers on. But remember, your work is creating a new foundation, even if they can't see it yet." Bolstered by Carla's words, Lucas decided to take an unconventional approach. He invited Alan to lunch, hoping that a direct conversation might help to bridge their differences. Alan accepted, though his tone over the phone was guarded, as though he were anticipating a confrontation. Lucas knew he was taking a risk, but he wanted to try one last time to reach Alan, to make him see that his vision for the company didn't have to conflict with the legacy Alan cherished. At the restaurant, the conversation began with polite pleasantries, but quickly grew tense as they delved into the issues at hand. "Alan," Lucas began, choosing his words carefully, "I know you care deeply about this company. You've spent your entire career here, and I respect that. But the world is changing, and if we want this company to thrive, we need to change with it. This isn't about erasing the past, it's about building on it." Alan looked at Lucas, his eyes hardening. "Lucas, you don't understand. You think you're here to save us, but you don't know what this company stands for. We built this company on hard work and tradition, not by pandering to every trend that comes along. Your ideas might be popular now, but they'll fade. And when they do, I'll still be here, holding this company together." Lucas took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of frustration and empathy. "This isn't a trend, Alan. It's the future. Inclusivity and respect aren't just words, they are values that can strengthen this company. They can attract talent, build loyalty, create a workplace where people want to stay. I'm not here to dismantle anything. I'm here to help this company become the best version of itself." Alan's expression remained guarded, but Lucas saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. For a brief moment, he thought he might have reached him. But Alan quickly masked it, his face hardening as he leaned forward. "I respect your ambition, Lucas," he said slowly, "but I don't believe you understand what's at stake. You think you're helping, but all you're doing is creating division. This company doesn't need a hero, it needs stability. After lunch, Lucas returned to the office with a heavy heart. He had tried to reach Alan, to appeal to his sense of pride and loyalty, but it was clear that Alan's vision of stability couldn't accommodate change. The conversation felt like a breaking point, a confirmation that no amount of reasoning would sway those who were set in their ways. He knew now that Alan wouldn't stop until Lucas was gone, his influence over the company's culture fully restored. That evening, Lucas held a gathering with his supporters, sharing his vision for the future and reaffirming his commitment to the cause. He spoke passionately, his words resonating with those who had been waiting for someone to finally champion them. He felt their energy, their belief in his mission, and it strengthened his resolve. No matter how hard it gets, he told them, we're in this together. This is about more than any one of us, it's about changing this company for everyone who comes after us. But as he left the office that night, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. He knew Alan and his allies would intensify their efforts to push him out. The whispers, the sabotage, the silent resistance, they were all symptoms of a culture that resisted progress, that clung to old ways as though they were shields against the inevitable march of time. The next day, Lucas received a summons to Mr. Collins's office. As he entered, he noticed Alan standing by the window, his arms crossed, his gaze distant. Mr. Collins looked grave, his face lined with tension. Lucas, he began, his tone hesitant, we need to talk. There have been concerns raised by certain senior staff about your role here. Some believe your initiatives have been too disruptive, that they are creating divisions rather than unity. Lucas felt his heart sink, but he steadied himself, his voice calm. Mr. Collins, I understand that change is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. We've made real progress, and the employees, especially the younger ones, are responding positively. I'm committed to this work because I believe it's the right thing for this company. He could see Alan watching him, his expression unreadable, and Lucas felt a surge of determination. Mr. Collins looked down, his fingers tapping the edge of his desk. Lucas, I respect everything you've done, but the board is divided. Some members are questioning whether this is the right time for such sweeping changes. They're worried about the impact on morale, about the potential risks to our reputation. I need you to be patient. Let us take a step back, reassess. Lucas felt a wave of frustration and disappointment, realizing that Mr. Collins was yielding to the pressure from Alan and his allies. He had hoped for stronger support, but it was clear that the internal resistance was wearing down even the most well-intentioned leaders. The battle was far from over, and as he left the office, he knew he would have to dig even deeper to find the strength to keep fighting against forces that seemed determined to maintain their grip on the past. The next morning, Lucas arrived at work with a resolve sharpened by the setbacks he'd faced. His heart was heavy with disappointment, but he knew that giving up wasn't an option. He had come too far, endured too much, and the employees who believed in his vision were counting on him. Steeling himself, he decided to make one last push for the changes he knew would transform the company. It was now or never. With a sense of urgency, Lucas organized an impromptu meeting with Mr. Collins and key board members. He presented concrete evidence of the positive impact his initiatives had already had: increased job satisfaction among underrepresented employees, improved morale among younger staff, and data showing a decrease in turnover among departments that had embraced his inclusivity workshops. He spoke passionately about the potential for long-term growth, about creating a legacy the company could be proud of. Mr. Collins listened intently, though his expression was conflicted. Some board members nodded in agreement, but Lucas could see Alan's disapproving gaze, his jaw clenched in frustration. Alan's silent resistance was palpable, yet Lucas held his ground, refusing to let intimidation sway his resolve. When he finished his presentation, he looked around the room, his eyes meeting each board member's, silently urging them to see beyond the old structures and to envision a future that was fairer and more inclusive. After a long silence, Mr. Collins finally spoke. Lucas, I admire your dedication, he began, his tone thoughtful. You've shown us what this company could become, and I believe in that vision. However, I've come to realize that real change isn't just about implementing new policies, it's about inspiring a cultural shift, one that will endure even after you're gone. He paused, his gaze softening. If we're going to commit to this, I want to ensure it's permanent. I'd like to offer you a full-time position as Director of Cultural Transformation. Your vision deserves to be fully realized, with the resources and authority you need to make it happen." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this offer, but he felt a surge of relief and validation. "Thank you, Mr. Collins," he replied, his voice steady. "I accept, on the condition that I have full backing to implement these changes. No more compromises. I need to know that the board stands with me." His gaze shifted to Alan, whose expression remained cold and unmoving, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. The board members looked at one another, and one by one, they nodded. Alan remained silent, his resistance now exposed and futile in the face of the collective decision. Mr. Collins, sensing the shift in momentum, finalized Lucas's new position, granting him the authority to lead a department focused solely on diversity, equity, and cultural reform. Lucas felt an overwhelming sense of triumph, but he kept his composure, knowing that this victory was bigger than him. News of Lucas's promotion spread through the company, igniting a wave of excitement and optimism among employees who had long yearned for change. Those who had once been hesitant began to see Lucas not just as a figurehead but as a leader who had earned his position through resilience and dedication. Sarah and other supporters congratulated him, their faces bright with hope and pride. Lucas felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that his journey had been supported by people who believed in the same vision. As Lucas settled into his new role, he worked tirelessly to dismantle the structures that had upheld biases and inequality within the company. He implemented mentorship programs, expanded inclusivity training, and ensured that hiring practices were rooted in fairness and transparency. His efforts began to ripple through the organization, transforming the culture from within, creating an environment where all employees felt valued and respected. Alan's presence faded over time, as his influence waned under Lucas's leadership. Eventually, he announced his retirement, a quiet departure that signaled the end of an era. Though Lucas held no resentment, he knew that Alan's departure symbolized a release of the old guard's grip on the company. It was a bittersweet reminder that change often came at a cost, but one that was necessary for growth. Months passed, and Lucas saw the impact of his work reflected in the faces of employees who now felt empowered to bring their full selves to work. The company's reputation, once stained by whispers of elitism, began to transform as well, with clients and partners recognizing the organization's commitment to inclusivity and integrity. Lucas knew that his journey hadn't just been about his own redemption, it had been about creating a space where others could thrive without fear of judgment or exclusion. One evening, as he walked through the office, Lucas was approached by a young intern who had joined the company only recently. She looked at him with gratitude in her eyes and said, "Thank you for everything you've done. You've made this a place where I feel like I belong." Her words touched him deeply, a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. At home that night, Lucas reflected on the path he had taken, the struggles, the setbacks, the unexpected triumphs. He thought of his mother, of her unwavering support, and the strength she had instilled in him. He knew that his success was as much hers as it was his own, a testament to the resilience they had both shown in the face of adversity. He made a promise to himself to carry that resilience forward, to continue advocating for fairness and respect, both within the company and beyond. In the years that followed, Lucas's work extended beyond his own organization. He became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story at conferences and universities, inspiring a new generation of leaders who believed in the power of inclusive workplaces. His journey from a ridiculed job applicant to a respected director became a symbol of perseverance, a reminder that real change was possible even in the most entrenched institutions. And so, Lucas's legacy grew, one built not on wealth or prestige, but on integrity, empathy, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to be seen for who they truly were. His story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and the impact one person could have in changing an entire system. If you like this story, take the opportunity to see the others that are appearing on your screen right now, subscribe to the channel and comment on what you thought of this story. See you soon, bye.